Things are getting serious really fast.
Yeah,
Uh, Urgent, maybe even mind-boggling.
absolutely. A lot to unpack
You know,
here.
when I first saw those headlines about Trump wanting to buy Greenland, I honestly thought it was a joke.
It did catch a lot of people off guard, but the reality is there's a lot more to it than just a real estate deal.
Okay, so let's get into it. What's going on with Greenland? Why is it suddenly such a hot topic?
Well, Greenland's location is strategically crucial. Think of it as a stepping stone right into North America. And as the ice melts, it's becoming even more significant for maritime routes, communication infrastructure, and potentially even military
So
operations.
you're saying that Greenland is becoming a new frontier in a global power struggle.
Exactly. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that Greenland is incredibly resource rich. We're talking oil, gas, rare earth minerals, and even potential for renewable energies.
Wow, it sounds like a treasure trove.
It certainly is, and that's attracting a lot of attention from major powers, especially the United States.
Okay, so let's talk about the US. They've had a presence in Greenland for a while, right? What's their current strategy?
You're right, they've had the full air base there for decades. But what's interesting is that their whole approach to Greenland is shifting. During the Cold War, it was all about protecting their borders, a perimeter strategy. Now they see the Arctic region and Greenland specifically as a new frontier that needs protecting. It's what you might call a polar strategy.
So this isn't just about buying land, it's about securing access to those resources and
Yeah,
maintaining their dominance in the region.
that's a key part of it, yes. And they're taking a multi-pronged approach, opening a new U.S. consulate in Greenland, offering financial aid packages, and actively working to deter both Russia and China's
Now,
influence.
Russia deploying the unstoppable Kinzhal missile in the Arctic is a pretty aggressive move, isn't it?
Clear sign that they're not backing down from their interests in the Arctic. It also raises concerns about a potential arms race in the region, which is definitely something to keep an eye on.
And what about China? They've been making moves all over the globe, so I can't imagine they'd ignore Greenland.
You're absolutely right. China's been using a tactic known as debt trap diplomacy in other parts of the world, essentially offering loans and investments that countries may struggle to repay and then leveraging that debt for influence.
So would they try to do the same thing in Greenland?
It's certainly a possibility, especially given Greenland's current economic dependence on Denmark. Over 50% of their government revenue comes from Danish subsidies, which makes them vulnerable to this kind of strategy.
So we've got the U.S. worried about Russia and China and Greenland potentially caught in the middle. It sounds like a recipe for conflict.
There's definitely a risk of that. The
Right.
Arctic is becoming a geopolitical hotspot, and Greenland is right at the center of it.
But what about Greenland's perspective in all of this? What do they want?
That's an important question. They're currently part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but there's a growing independence movement within Greenland.
So they might want to break away from Denmark entirely?
It's a complex situation. On one hand, they want more control over their own resources and their future. On the other hand, they're a small nation with limited infrastructure, and they'd need to be careful not to become too reliant on any one global power.
So they're walking a tightrope trying to balance their own interests with the demands of these global players.
Exactly. And it's a situation that could have major implications for the relationship between Europe and the United States.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. If Greenland leans too heavily towards the U.S., wouldn't that upset European nations?
Absolutely. It could create a rift between the U.S. and its European allies, especially Denmark, which has historical and cultural ties to Greenland.
So this isn't just a regional issue. It has the potential to disrupt global alliances and create further divisions on the world stage.
You're getting it. The situation in Greenland is far more complex than it might appear at first glance.
It's a lot to process, to be honest.
It is, but it's crucial to understand these dynamics because what happens in Greenland could have significant consequences for everyone. And it's not just the US, Russia, and China vying for influence. Other countries are starting to see Greenland's potential too.
Really? Who else is entering the picture?
Well, Japan, for one, they've been increasingly investing in foreign raw material projects, and they see Greenland as a strategically important source of those materials. Plus, there's the potential for scientific research collaborations as well.
So Greenland's attracting interest from all corners of the globe. But with all these countries wanting a piece of the pie, how can Greenland ensure they benefit and don't just get exploited?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to their credit, it seems Greenland is taking a proactive approach to managing its resources responsibly.
I was reading about that. They've implemented some pretty strict environmental regulations, haven't they?
Yes, absolutely. For any company wanting to operate in Greenland, they have to submit a detailed environmental impact assessment before they can even start. Then there are all sorts of rules about waste disposal, pollution control, and even site restoration after mining operations are finished.
So they're not just handing over their resources without considering the long-term consequences.
Not at all. It seems like they're trying to find that sweet spot between economic development and environmental protection, which is a tough balancing act for any nation, let alone one facing this level of global interest.
We've been talking a lot about the geopolitical and economic aspects, but let's not forget the elephant in the room, or should I say the melting ice sheet, climate change. What impact is that having on Greenland?
It's a huge factor. The
Hmm.
Arctic as a whole is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet, and Greenland is right on the front lines of that change.
Some of the reports I read painted a pretty stark picture. Rising sea levels, changes in ocean currents, impacts on biodiversity. It's alarming.
It is, and it's not just an environmental concern. It has major geopolitical implications as well. The more the ice melts, the more accessible those shipping routes become, and the higher the potential for conflict as countries compete for access and control.
It's almost like a ticking time bomb.
In a way, yes. And it underscores the urgency of finding solutions not just for Greenland, but for the entire planet.
So we've got this incredibly complex situation with global powers vying for influence, climate change looming large, and Greenland trying to navigate its own path. What does the future hold? What are some potential scenarios that might play out?
Well, one possibility is that Greenland continues on its current path, working within the Kingdom of Denmark while pushing for greater autonomy and control over its own affairs.
That seems like the most stable option, at least in the short term.
It probably is.
Yeah.
But there's also the possibility that Greenland pushes for full independence from Denmark.
Would they be able to handle that? It's a small nation with limited resources and infrastructure.
It would certainly be a massive undertaking. They'd need to develop their own military, establish diplomatic relations with other countries, and build up their infrastructure to support a truly independent state.
That's a tall order.
It is. And they'd need to be very careful about who they align themselves with. If they lean too heavily towards one global power, they risk alienating others and becoming a pawn in someone else's game.
It's like they're walking a tightrope trying to find that balance between independence and security.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the wild card of climate change. How that unfolds will have a major impact on Greenland's future no matter what path they choose.
You know, amidst all this talk of geopolitics and resource competition, it's easy to forget that there are actual people living in Greenland. What about their perspective? What are their hopes and fears for the future?
You're right. We need to remember the human dimension of this story. I was reading an interview with a Greenlandic politician, and she said something that really stuck with me. She said, "We don't want to be a pawn in anyone's game. We want to be masters of our own destiny."
That's powerful. It speaks to their desire for self-determination and control over their own future.
Absolutely. And it highlights the fact that this isn't just some abstract geopolitical chess game. There are real lives at stake here, and the choices that are made will have a profound impact on the people of Greenland for generations to come.
I'm also curious about the cultural implications. Greenland has a unique history and identity shaped by their environment and their relationship with Denmark. How would independence affect that?
That's a really important consideration. There's this fascinating tension between their ethnic kinship with the Inuit people of North America and their historical ties to Denmark. Some Greenlanders feel a strong connection to their Inuit heritage and see independence as a way to reclaim that identity. Others feel closer to Denmark and worry that independence would sever those ties.
It's a complex mix of cultural, historical, and political factors all intertwined.
Exactly, and it's something that Greenlanders themselves will have to grapple with as they chart their course for the future.
This has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I've learned so much, but I also realize how much more there is to understand about this complex situation.
That's the nature of a deep dive, isn't it? You start peeling back the layers and you realize just how multifaceted the issue really is.
You know, when I look at a map, Greenland just seems so vast and remote. It's hard to grasp the scale of what's happening there and why it matters to the rest of the world.
I know what you mean. Yeah, it's easy to see it as this far-off place that has little to do with our daily lives. But the reality is what happens in Greenland has ripple effects that can be felt globally.
So how do we connect the dots? Help us understand why this seemingly distant land should matter to us.
Well, for starters, the Arctic plays a crucial role in regulating the Earth's climate. The melting ice sheet in Greenland contributes to rising sea levels, which threaten coastal communities worldwide.
Right, so that directly impacts people's lives and livelihoods in very real ways.
Exactly. And then there are the potential consequences for global shipping routes and resource extraction. As the Arctic becomes more accessible, competition for control over those resources could intensify, leading to geopolitical tensions and even conflict.
So it's not just about Greenland's future. It's about the future of global security and stability.
Absolutely. And then there's the ethical dimension. What responsibilities do we have to the people of Greenland as they navigate this complex landscape? How do we ensure that their voices are heard and their interests are protected?
It's a lot to consider, and it can feel overwhelming. But what gives you hope in all of this?
I find hope in the resilience of the Greenlandic people. They're facing these challenges head on. They're actively involved in discussions about resource development, environmental protection, and their political future. They're not passive bystanders, they're shaping their own destiny.
Yes, and I've read about their commitment to sustainable development. They're investing in renewable energy, diversifying their economy, and focusing on education and training for their people.
Exactly. They're taking a long-term view, thinking about the well-being of future generations. And that gives me hope that they can find a path forward that benefits their people while also contributing to a more sustainable and peaceful world.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of the complexities surrounding Greenland.
Me too. And I think the key takeaway is that Greenland is not just a piece of land on a map. It's a place with a rich history, a vibrant culture, and a people who are determined to chart their own course.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What can we as individuals do to better understand and engage with what's happening in Greenland?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed. Read articles, follow news reports, and engage in the thoughtful discussions about the issues. Support organizations working to protect the Arctic environment and promote sustainable development in the region.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, right? What happens in Greenland, even though it might seem far away, does have implications for all of us.
Exactly. And by understanding those connections, we can make more informed choices in our own lives and advocate for policies that promote a more sustainable and just future for everyone, including the people of Greenland.
Well, thank you for taking us on this deep dive. It's given us a lot to think about and a lot to learn from.
It's been my pleasure, and I hope our listeners will continue to explore this fascinating and important topic.
And as always, thanks for listening to Scientia et Experientia. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world's most pressing issues.